practice makes permanent.
Where does my time really add value? And really be clear on where you add value.
Learning is exactly that. It's the art of gaining knowledge. But if you do not apply that knowledge on a regular basis, you're not practicing that knowledge.
People outperforming isn't necessarily knowledge or skills. It's often the environment they're working in. If you're running a business in this day and age, you're a problem solver.
And you can either be reliant on the tool or you can use it as an actual tool itself to bring you the success that you're looking for.
If you can see it, you can manage it.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a growth company that helps professional services firms from around the world increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Graham Hill, founder of A&P Learning Solutions, a performance improvement consultancy. Graham brings over 2 decades of experience transforming how organizations approach learning and performance. Graham helps organizations bridge the gap between training and actual performance improvement. He's passionate about business agility, challenging the conventional wisdom of corporate L&D, and exploring what big businesses can learn from smaller, more nimble companies. Graham, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Saeed.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation, primarily from the fact that I think what you mention about bringing L&D and being more agile for big businesses is a really important attribute. The world is moving really fast right now with technological advances, AI adoption and things like that. And big businesses can often move too slow for what the environment and the market needs. So I think 100% it's very important for them to do that. But before we jump into the actual conversation, I think the best place to start is really giving the viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand who Graham actually is. So if you could share a little bit more about yourself, maybe your role in the organization, and a little bit more about A&P Learning Solutions.
Yeah, no problem, Saeed. Yeah, so my name's Graham Hill. Been involved in L&D in various roles in various organizations for 25 years plus. That's ranged from being self-employed, delivering learning around lean business improvement and leadership, also involving safety culture and safety leadership. I've also run small and medium-sized learning functions in organizations, construction organizations, oil and gas and utility organizations. So I had a spell at BP where I led a design team, designing learning content and pulling together leadership programs that were run globally. A&P Learning Solutions was set up 2 years ago. Our aim is to really look at, so the A&P is agile and performance focused. So this idea that organizations really in this current world need to be agile and to be able to move quickly. And the concept of a 10-year strategy or a 5-year strategy is now being questioned. COVID pandemic really showed us that the companies that did best were those that could change really quickly and adapt and didn't get stuck in this concept of this is what we do and this is what we've always done. And the performance concept is, from a learning perspective, we've been involved in various learning organizations and organizations providing learning solutions. And we often get caught up in what training course we need people to do, especially in high-risk industries where so much of it's compliance. But we do get very much dragged into, have they completed this course in the last 3 to 5 years? What courses do people need to go on? Where we want to bring the focus more to performance. Another big part in my life is sport. I've always been involved in sport from being a child to a reasonably high level. And that's very much around performance. And if we look at sport, the high percentage of sport is in practice. In a corporate work environment, we send people on a training course to gain knowledge and then expect the performance. So it's that balance between, how do you get this balance between allowing people to build skills and develop skills and get experience to impact on the performance? And that's very much what A&P Learning Solutions focuses on.
It's really interesting that you said that, primarily because it's really interesting your reference to sport. Right. And I think it reminds me of a really important saying that I learned very young while I was playing basketball at school. The coach simply said, practice makes permanent. And it was very different to what I was taught before that, which is practice makes perfect, practice makes perfect. Yeah. And it made me really understand what practicing actually is there for. Learning is exactly that. It's the art of gaining knowledge. But if you do not apply that knowledge on a regular basis, you're not practicing that knowledge. And therefore, how can you expect performance to come from the back of that if you're not consistently practicing that? So I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that. So talk to me about agile and performance-focused work, and how does A&P come into an organization, and what is it that you can actually do that allows employees in an organization to actually be able to practice the knowledge that they've gained?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I come from a lean background, delivering lean and business improvement. And in my spell at BP, we started to take on agile ways of working, and we ran that into our team. And we were effectively, for want of a better word, a production line, producing learning content. And we started to focus very much on this agile way of thinking, is that rather than looking for perfection, rather than making a plan and not engaging with our clients through the process, we would actually work with our clients on a weekly, bi-weekly stage, showing them the small incremental changes rather than trying to draft what they wanted and go back to them 3 months later with a finished product that actually wasn't what they wanted. They just hadn't realized. So often in that relationship between providing a product or providing a service and actually your initial interactions, there's a gap between it. Those people's perceptions have changed, our perception of what that person asked us to do. And I always use the analogy of when I worked in construction, if you don't work in construction and you were wanting a new house built and somebody showed you a piece of paper with the plans of your house laid out in front, although you'd be very emotional about it, be very excited because you're spending a lot of money, but you've got very little concept of how much room you've got to put a sofa in. What's the route you're going to walk through the building? Is there anything that's going to make that difficult? And the kitchen layout, because you're looking at a piece of paper, but the people doing the building do these drawings every day. They know exactly how that works. And I always described our environment like that. When we do a storyboard for a piece of learning, we understand what that's going to look like, but the customer doesn't necessarily, but they will agree to it. So the idea of that agile interactions is this test, change, tweak, test, change, tweak, test. And what we found in implementing that as a way of working was often actually we didn't get to what was the initial request before we've said, well, actually, this meets every need we've got. And that little bit more investment in time and effort actually has very little reward. So we were delivering quicker. Our customer was part of that actual process. So we were engaging them on a regular basis and they were molding this. And if we made changes, we hadn't developed 3 months worth of work and then going back and changing it. At the very most, we'd done 2 weeks of work. So this idea of this increment, involving your customer, engaging your customer in the solution, and actually looking at maybe not necessarily what's described as minimum viable product, but you're not always going for the Rolls Royce. But in those initial discussions, you might much be going for the Rolls Royce. So it's that idea of that interaction with customers and that engagement, and then linking that with performance of actually not what courses do we want people to put people on, because some people can sit in a 2-day course, absorb and apply. Some people need to practice it. Some people need to watch other people doing it. People will engage in that in different ways, but our outcome should be, how do we get the performance we want from people? And sometimes, as part of the agile process, we use the storytelling thing. As a line manager, I would like this individual to be able to do this, and then so that. And often when you ask customers, why do you want them to be able to do that? It's a very difficult question to ask. Well, we've always done it like that. Or, well, I don't really know why I want them to do it, but it says there in the textbook, this is why I want them to do it. So really digging into what is it we want them to be able to do? And then knowledge, skills, behaviors. Have they got the knowledge? Do they already know it? Have they been able to turn that knowledge into a practice and actually physically do it? And then have they got the right behaviors to actually apply that learning?
So what do you think are the biggest blockers for actual high performance or a good level of performance within an organization?
Regularly understanding the problem they're trying to solve. So going back to my lean background, the initial stages are you really dig into, and to be honest, the more time you spend on that planning, that understanding what the problem is, the answers drop out of that. But in so many cases, we jump to solution before we've actually fully understood the problem we're trying to solve. So in the learning world, there's something called performance consultancy. So you sit down with your clients and you ask, right, okay, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the performance issue? And then first question, do the individuals involved in this process know that process? Have they got the knowledge to actually apply it? And often we've put them through training 3 times now, and now we need to put them through the same training again. Right, okay, so we can assume they've got the knowledge. So have they been given the opportunity to develop those skills? Yeah. Have they been able to, do they do it regularly enough? And some jobs don't allow that. So how do you provide that opportunity? Then you get to the next bit of, well, they may have the knowledge and they may have the skills, but actually, is the culture right in the organization for this concept? Actually, does it fit in with the culture of this business, or is the business drive, deliver, rather than giving people the space to practice? And then finally, the environment. So, if you use the phrase, what interests my boss fascinates me, this concept of if my line manager isn't interested in me doing this, well, am I going to really be interested in doing it? If I'm not getting recognition for doing it, if it's not captured, if it's not seen as, fits into that culture. So often this concept of people outperforming isn't necessarily knowledge or skills. It's often the environment they're working in or the culture of the company. So it's really understanding the problem we're trying to solve.
I think what you said makes a lot of sense, in the sense that a lot of organizations are there. They're trying to train their staff, right? They're training, they do all the things that they feel like they should be doing. But when it comes to environment, culture, behaviors, that's where maybe the thinking stops and it becomes more of a process driven. Okay, well, have you done this, done the training? Then you should be competent enough to be able to run into whatever scenario and be able to handle it. And obviously that it's not realistic to be like that. In terms of, and you touched on it earlier when you spoke about how COVID-19 and the pandemic changed the game in terms of the 5-year plans, the 10-year plans are no longer worthwhile. What can big businesses learn from smaller startup, little businesses? How can the lessons from these smaller companies actually affect big change in big businesses?
So we just released a podcast called Flying Biscuits, and the 3rd edition has just been released last week. And that's sitting down with a guy called Jamie Rothwell, who runs an electrical company. But we're telling the story of Jamie from being a 2-man band with his dad as an electrical company, right the way through to a company that has 40 employees and works for some of the big rail companies, etc. But it's still at that reasonably small stage, and there's levels of management and tiers of management. So some of the things we talk about in that podcast are things like your core skills, communication, problem solving, these transferable skills, because often in smaller organizations, you haven't got multiple departments. So people need to have skills and have that broader concept that you don't necessarily get in an organization. We talk about a model called systems thinking. So this systems thinking is, what's the overall impact of this happening here? And the discussion in the podcast, we talk about buying a drill. So in this situation, Jamie's been an electrician, he's been out there, he's done the work, he's got those experiences. So when he's buying drills for the guys he's got working for him, he'll spend a reasonable amount of money on a drill because he knows that 1, he won't replace it as much. 2, the guys know they've got the best kit. They're not dealing with substandard kit. Now, the minute you get to a scale where you've got a procurement department that are targeted on the spend of that procurement department, or, broaden that out, you've got, if you're talking about manpower, you've got different parts of a company spending their energy, their time, their finances on trying to justify who sits in which department, trying to understand who gets what budget, where the concept of systems thinking is you're looking at the whole. I think if you look at the energy, resources, the time that are wasted in larger organizations, and often people don't have that more global view of the organization, that holistic view of actually, if I do this, what's the impact on that? So really going back to my lean backgrounds, is it adding value? Is it adding value to the organization? and where you've got a lot of internal processes, are these processes actually servicing the organization, or are they servicing the various silos of the organization? And if you've got silos competing, where's the win? The win can only be that there's business time and effort being wasted in areas that are adding value.
I think it's so interesting. I think you're spot on in your evaluation there. My question to you then becomes, how do you solve that problem? And how do you get that procurement team to think differently, or get the big business to think a little bit differently? Because you're right, small businesses, you could have 40 employees, but you're still a small business. And in comparison to an employee business, right, there are levels to it. But you're absolutely right in saying that the staff, the team feel a different way if they've got the best toolkit. If the leadership don't feel like they have to replace that item as much, the long-term cost is better than the short-term cost. And how do you solve that problem?
If I knew that. If I look back at people I've worked with that have really, and we tend to have an education system in this country where we sort of put everything around degrees and academic rather than experiential knowledge. And I think one of the things we need to look at is everybody seems to want to elevate to the top. So all our education system is about getting to a degree, getting to a master's degree, getting to a PhD. And what we end up with is these very, very knowledgeable people in a very, very small area. Now, I had the pleasure of working with a guy, Victor Alvarado, at BP. He was a chemical engineer. He'd managed plants for BP, and he managed the plant at Hull. But what was very different about Victor is part of the way through his career, he took a step back, and he actually went into the financial and the sales part of the business to understand the commercial operations of a business. And the reason he got that sight was previously we'd had a commercial director and an operations director that were always in conflict. They were all, this non-value added time we talked about. He had that concept. He had that broader knowledge of how the whole organization worked. And I think we often end up with leaders who are very good at doing the technical bit without necessarily having that broader understanding of the impact across the organization. I had the pleasure when I worked at Portakabin and doing the lean training, we often saw this really broad view of the organization. And it's easy to assume that everybody else has that broad view, but people are often only seeing what they have. I always refer to people see things through a certain lens, and it's not necessarily the same lens you look through. So, I remember having a conversation with a guy who worked in metal fabrication, and, they'd cut overtime, but we couldn't deliver on-time delivery. And his view was put overtime on, create more stock, deliver on time. But actually, what you want to do is be able to deliver just in time, not have lots of stock. Once you talk through this with this guy, he was looking for different solutions. But in the world he'd seen, the lenses he had, he was just seeing it through overtime, more production, rather than more effective production. And in my experience, if you can actually give people that understanding and educate, and it doesn't have to be at the highest level, they find different solutions as long as you do, as long as you engage them in the understanding of it. So to answer your question, how do we get this where companies are understanding? In fact, I think it's educating people of the whole organization, helping them understand the values of the organization and how they are contributing to those values. And sometimes it might be that you have to give a little bit for another team to come through, but for the overall benefit of the organization. Not easy, but I think companies are really strong shared values are the ones that will do best on that.
I think it's really interesting hearing that. And I think you're spot on. It all stems from, and naturally in the larger organizations, you're going to be working in silos and you're going to be working in your departments, and they could be larger departments. And some of these departments are as big as a small business in themselves, right? And so in itself, you are managing, or the leaders within those departments managing a small business in themselves. So understanding that you're a small business within a larger business, and then being a leader, being enough of a leader to be aware of what the other elements of the business do to actually integrate into the larger business. 100%. That just having that awareness will allow for better communication allowances within the organization, and also, I guess, overall improve how the organization operates, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think everything you've said has been really interesting and thought provoking. And typically, I would love to continue talking about this, but we have to jump into the next section of the podcast, which is what we call the entrepreneur's room. And that's a series of questions we like to ask all of our guests to give our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand how business owners and business leaders think and operate when running their business. So at this stage of the podcast, I'd like to ask the same question, which is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader of the business?
Yeah. Okay. So the business is relatively new. So we're under 2 years at the moment, and it's largely me as a consultancy organization. Things are changing at the moment, working with some bigger consultancies, contracting to them and working with them. And I think that's sometimes as a business, you've got to look at what you're good at, what you're not good at. And this is a challenge when you're setting up your own business, because there's all sorts of tasks you've got to do. And it's a really tough decision of saying, actually, what do I pay that person to do? Because my time, it comes back to value added. Yeah. Where does my time really add value? And really be clear on where you add value. I talked about the podcast initially. When we did the podcast, we tried to record it and edit it ourselves. I was a learning person. I should know, get the experts to do it. And it was a real learning curve. And what you see now is the outcome of bringing in a professional. And we did what we do best, which was talking about and pulling on the experiences, let somebody else do the recording, etc. So there's that process of deciding what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, and what I'm willing to pay somebody else to do. Because we talk a lot about playing with your own money. When you set up your own business, it is your own money. So you have a completely different concept of it. But the other big thing for me is network. Increasingly, this world is about networking and having that broad network and really tapping into those people that broaden your understanding. It is this bit of, surround yourself with intelligent people and you will flourish because these people are feeding you and engaging with you. And I think that idea of being really clear of who your network are, who your close network are, how you build that customer network and how you can service that network. Again, one of the things we touched on the podcast, which really surprised me starting up a new business, was the conversation with Jamie was about almost selecting your customers. Now, I'd always thought you get a customer and they're selecting you, but he was talking about it almost the other way, is building up a really good relationship with customers, but there's no good building up a really good relationship with the wrong customers. Yeah. You want customers that are going to work with you, that you're going to be able to help them, because much as it doesn't help them if there's no outcome at the end of it, it doesn't help you either, because you haven't got the stories to tell, the examples to show. So it's important that you're going to work well together and then really build those relationships with customers. And I think increasingly we've got to move away from, this is what I do. If you're running a business in this day and age, you're a problem solver, and you don't have to look very far at organizations that have flourished, not because they've done what they do really well, but because they've gone, there's a problem. How do we solve that problem? Yeah. The absolute, I look at Amazon. Who thinks of Amazon as a book company anymore? That's where they started, in a garage as a book company. But no, not now. They solve problems. They, Virgin, all these organizations have become very good at solving problems. And what that is you turn to your customer, what's the problem you've got? Let's understand the problem and let's look at how we can support you in solving that problem. So I think what's my time spent doing? Building networks, being very clear myself of what interests me and what I'm passionate about, and make sure that what I'm doing is what I'm passionate about, and what I'm not passionate about, I'm probably not going to add a lot of value. So use other people who can add that value for you to do that, because in the long run, it's probably more cost effective.
Absolutely. Absolutely love it. So what are the most important metrics for you in running your business?
So given that our time, agile and performance related, it's really understanding that the metrics is, and it's not easy in learning to measure performance, because by the time we get to that performance, there's that concept. But it's really customers feeling that you've made a difference, that they see a difference in that performance, in that they see people thinking differently, And it's, I mean, some of the areas we've worked in oil and gas with the guys working on oil rigs, and it was about safety culture, and you're working with them on safety culture. So there is an argument of the only way you measure safety culture is if there isn't any incidents or less incidents, and it's that mindset. And it's always, there's so many different players in that field. But I do think we need to, all this idea of bums on seats, hours in the classroom means absolutely nothing unless it changes performance at the end of the day. Because you're not helping the business. In fact, I've worked in various companies where the drive is to have people away from the workplace for less time. So the more focus on building skills and experience and less of putting them in a classroom, it is beneficial all around.
It's literally learn through doing, right?
As much as possible, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned network is one of your fundamental pillars of growing the business and things like that. But how are you currently growing the business? What kind of business development activities are you specifically doing to grow the business?
So there's a few things going on at the moment. We're working with another company, Prime Talent, a friend again, a friend I've worked with, and we're sort of doing some stuff together as well with a few other people. So building up that LinkedIn network, making sure that you're up to date and that you're building that network. For me, going through this experience, a new experience for me, one side you've probably been doing for a while now, is developing podcasts and trying to get podcasts out there. And that's a whole new world to me. But it's been an interesting piece of work, and it's been even the learning process of actually really stripping down actually the subject we're going to talk about from that perspective, and then engaging. So I live in Yorkshire, and there's actually like a LinkedIn group called Yorkshire Mafia, which is one of the biggest LinkedIn groups.
Oh, wow.
But they're very clever in the way they work. They work an online organization, but then they have like drinks evenings and social evenings where they get people speaking and things like that. So engaging in those sorts of events, and then working with customers, building those relationships, going and meeting customers, being involved in things like this, keeping up to date with the changes in the industry. I mean, in learning and development, everything you go to at the moment seems to use the word AI at the beginning of everything now. I hear very different views. You hear a resistance to it. And maybe long enough in the tooth to remember when we were told we'd only be working 3 days a week because of computers not that long ago. It's a tool. I think people have got to have the view of it's a tool. How can this help me? How can this tool support me? But I do think, maybe deviating a little bit, but I do think one of the things AI has brought in is actually it's brought us back to our fundamental core skills over technical skills. So if you're a good problem solver, if you challenge things, if you make sure that what somebody's telling you is true and don't just accept it, these are all the skills that are going to fit into a world of AI in preference to the technical, I need to do A, B, C, D. I'm not saying we don't need to do those, but interesting when you were saying about how do we make sure organizations have that broader view, develop your foundational skills, your core skills in your people. And if they're good communicators, they're good people managers, they can engage, spur innovation, then does it really matter which area of the business they sit in? You're not paying that person to be the innovator, you're paying that person to motivate the other people to be the innovators.
I love it. And I absolutely agree with you. It's a case of the world is changing, the world is evolving, and it's really a case of understanding where the new world will be, right? And understanding that AI is a tool, just like computers were a tool, just like a phone was a tool. Everything is a tool, and you can either be like reliant on the tool, or you can use it as an actual tool itself to bring you the success that you're looking for, right?
Just on that side, there's from an agile world, agile is very much about visibility. And I remember years ago, I worked for a Japanese construction company, and one of the directors I was talking to said, he used a very, very simple phrase that stuck with me. If you can see it, you can manage it. And if you can visualize and you can see the skills you have in the organization, it then helps you when you see how the business is changing and where these people can adapt the skills. If you can see the performance of your organization day to day, it changes how you behave. If you can visualize as much of your business as you can possibly do, you will make logical decisions. If you can't see it, you're making assumptions. And it will often be the voice that speaks loudest that will get listened to in preference to facts, data, information, real sound decision making.
Couldn't agree more. That's it's so interesting. If you can see it, you can manage it. I love it.
Absolutely.
You've been running the business for just shy of 2 years now. What's the biggest lesson you could share with us today for the viewers and listeners?
I don't think I ever underestimated the work involved. It's a very busy market. You've got to be prepared to really sell yourself because there is a lot of people out there. But again, don't necessarily jump at the wrong customers. Make sure that the values, be very clear of what your values are, what you're passionate about. Make sure that the people you're working with share some of those values and those understandings. Go in with an open mind. I think it's very easy whenever you go into any organisation, the voices you hear, but everybody sees things through a different lens. So be very clear on what lens the people you're talking to are seeing it through. And another, again, you sometimes have that luxury of seeing things from different levels within organisations, and people are very focused on what they see, but they don't necessarily understand that actually other people in the organisation are trying to achieve exactly the same as what you are.
Yeah.
They're just seeing it through a different lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So to me, it's being open and having that really open view to say, I'm going to try and understand what lens those people are seeing it through and what they're actually trying to achieve rather than jumping to assumptions.
Love it. Graham, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I'd like to end every single conversation with the same question. And that is, if you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one of your business problems, what would that be?
People taking the time to understand the problem they're trying to solve. Part of the thing of a rapidly changing world is people jump into, this is what we need to do. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in finding the perfect solution, but let's understand what we're trying to achieve, understand the problem we're trying to solve, and then we can do iterations of the solution. I think in a fast-changing world, people try and, we used to use the phrase, you just keep throwing something at the wall until it sticks, and then you go, oh, that's business improvement. Well, actually, it isn't. It's just luck. Eventually, if you throw enough at a wall, something will stick.
Something's going to stick, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just really just taking that time at the beginning, and that, the Japanese culture was very much plan. Put the time in the planning. It might not be macho. You're working in construction, all people want to do is get on site and dig. But actually, spending that extra time planning and understanding before you actually go into the process will save you hours and hours and hours.
Well, Graham, thank you very much for sharing your time today. It's been a great conversation. I've loved it. Had a thoroughly enjoyable time. For all those out there that might want to reach out to you, where would they go? How would they find you?
So I've got a website on ANPlearning.com. If you go there, you'll find out everything about A&P Learning and about myself.
Amazing. Well, Graham, thank you very much again.
Okay. Cheers, Syed.
Appreciate it.